Hey there, this is Dan. You're watching the Salty Sea, and today we are going to talk about triples in order. I am going to keep on keeping on with the series on all the abilities in Warcry that give the game structure, that give both the competitive game structure and give you the most kind of to build around in casual play that you will actually have fun with and that will actually kind of give you what you put into them. So I'm very excited about it. We are going into triples. Triples are funny because when you evaluate them, you can't just do it the same way you would do doubles, right? Because doubles have like rush and onslaught are just very standard effects that kind of give you a set amount that you can kind of really go by. Triples don't. The universal triple is really bad. I'm really curious. Every once in a while, you see some designs like new incoming factions, new incoming fighters that make it seem like the designers think that the universal triple inspiring presence is insanely good and should be used in every single game. And it does have some use in certain treasure missions, but for the most part, it's like really bad. And I just wish I could interview Johnny B just for a second, just about inspiring presence. I would promise to not ask a single thing about Warcry 3rd Edition if I could just pick his brain on inspiring presence. But we can still evaluate triples, one, based on each other, but two, based on doubles. So for example, whenever you roll a double, you have the option to use a wild dice to make a triple out of it. Or you could use that wild dice to make two doubles, or you could use that wild dice to make a single, right? So the value of a triple is kind of given to you by that exchange rate. It should at least be worth 1.9 doubles because, yes, sometimes you do roll a natural triple. So triples do happen on their own. Sometimes they don't always happen via wild dice. So they're not quite worth two doubles, but that is the exchange rate. So you generally want to be getting twice the value of what you would get from a double. And since doubles are so much more flexible, I kind of want to get more than twice the value if I'm being honest. So let's talk about this then, right? So for damage, you really want to be looking at either 6 guaranteed damage or EV8. So what I talk about when I mean EV8 is on average 8 damage. So it might even be an ability where you never actually get 8 damage. So calling it EV8 is really just a statement we make about the bell curve of what kind of damage you can expect. But if we wanted to give you the exact percentages of every outcome, we'd be here all day and nobody wants that. The reason I like 6 guaranteed is if you absolutely know you're going to get 6 points out of it. 6 is the real break point, though. I think 6 is a lot better than 5 because there's a proliferation of like really good grots, like little 6 wound fighters with good abilities. They just put out the Ruination Chamber, which is a whole Stormcast chamber where half its abilities combo around these stupid 6 wound dogs. And so being able to get rid of them and guarantee that you'll get rid of it for just some ability dice is actually really strong. So I do think that because of destruction and because of doggos, doggos both in Wildercore and in Stormcast now, because of those things, I think being able to just guarantee 6 damage is very, very powerful as long as you know you'll never miss, right? So the reason I go to EV8 is I talked about in my previous video that I'll hopefully remember to link right here, that the Onslaught in order gives you between 2.3 and 4.3 or sorry 4.6 damage. And so you really want to be looking for like EV4 for doubles. And so if you can get twice that for triples, then you're kind of getting the going rate. And the vast majority of triples are much worse than that, but some of them are scale really, really well. If you're going for movement on your triples, 6 inches of total movement is really nice to have. So there's a lot of ways to get 3 inches of movement off of a double, sometimes even 4. So if you can get to twice that, that really matters. But again, like all movement abilities, the models that you're moving matter the most here, right? Are you moving just a ton of points worth of models? What will those points do, right? Can you move 5 models at a time to get onto all the objectives and steal all the treasures that you could possibly want to steal, or are you just moving one giant thing but getting it way across the board? That's also incredibly valuable. But if you're just moving like a couple derpy people who don't really do much, that's not as valuable, right? So, the package you're delivering is just as important as whether you're getting it there on time. Finally, we have actions. The going rate for actions on a double is 1, right? So it just stands to reason that on a triple it would be 2. And there are quite a few triples that indicate that they're kind of aware that that's similar to the going rate. But here, again, always with action triples, conditions really matter. And so we'll talk about that. Last is disruption. There's really not much track record of control triples being successful in order. The fighters that have the control triples, there's quite a few good ones, but the fighters that have them just aren't good enough that you're excited to play them. Some of them are like really big elites, things like that, but generally in this game, your elites need to be offensive and your chaff is better when it's defensive. That's not a hard and fast rule. That's not always true, but it is sort of a thing that's sort of true 3 out of 4 times at least. And so a lot of sort of defensive elites are just not good enough, not really useful in very many situations. And so that just kind of puts you in a tough spot for a lot of these order disruption stuff. We will see some good disruptive triples once we get to the other Grand Alliances. Last, I just need to talk about Dragon Maul. That is the best triple in the game. It is probably the best ability in the game. Obviously, Dragon Maul is not nearly as oppressive since they nerfed monsters, but if you can get a monster into your list and still sort of check the other sorts of boxes that a list should check, Dragon Maul is still going to be incredibly powerful. You pick any enemy fighter within 6 inches, you put it from the battlefield and set them up within 1 inch of that monster. Monster bases are like 2.5 inches by 4 inches about a lot of the time, and so you just like they're 6 inches away and then you bring them all the way over to the other side of your base. That's a ridiculous amount of movement. You just get to take one of their fighters and put it in a completely different neighborhood. You can put it tied up with some of your own other fighters, and then of course you get to deal a bunch of damage. So if you're on 666s, your EV is 9 with this, which is like better than a bunch of damage ability EVs, right? So Dragon Maul is insane. It's the best ability in the game, probably. Well, I don't know if it's possible for a triple to be the best ability in the game, but it's absolutely one of the best abilities in the game, and every other triple kind of pales in comparison to it. So we're just not going to discuss it other than just right here. All right, let's get into the movement triples in order, and I'm pretty excited about this. I think when I talked about doubles, move or action doubles are like pretty much the best you get, but in triples, the other types of triples really get their kind of glow up here. And the only real difference here is rate. Let's talk about To Me Warriors, for example. Now, this is technically an action triple, but it's almost impossible to convert your action or these actions into damage. It's not impossible, but it's really hard. And so I really think of this much more as a movement triple than as an action triple, because what's really easy to do with this ability is to convert it into points. Let's read it real quick. Each friendly fighter with the Cities of Sigmar Castlelite hosts faction rune mark within 6 inches of this fighter can make a bonus move. That move must end closer to this fighter. So a lot of the time what you'll do is you will move, sort of double move your Herald, and then you will bring everyone from that deployment group, get a free bonus action, and then usually you'll be close enough so that another deployment group can get a bonus action as well. And then they don't have to end that much closer, right? So you can kind of move the diagonal across him and end up just 1/2 inch closer, something like that. And so you can get all your people just way closer to, a section of the battlefield. It is, when I say it's hard to convert that into damage, it's because a lot of what you're doing here is getting steel helms into position. But you can do stuff like get a horse master into position, like the horse lord who can overrun him. Like if you move your herald twice and then your horse runs past him, um, and then can be standing kind of in front of him, maybe even engage the enemy, something like that. That can be pretty good, but it feels, when I've seen it played against me, it really feels like a giant move buff that moves everyone forward. It also does convert into weight actions. I don't know, I'm waffling on whether or not it should be a movement triple or an action triple, but it's definitely straddling that line. Swift as the Wind has been meta defining for all of second edition. Then they sort of reworked how Cities of Sigmar work, which was bad news for a lot of Dwarven enjoyers of Swift as the Wind, at least. But they did replace it with Release the River. Release the River belongs to the Pureblood Seneschal out of Yadrillin Riverblades. Lumineth Realm Lord ability, or names are stupid. Whatever. I'm a Warhammer fan. Most Warhammer names are dumb. We can move on. Release the River. Until the end of the battle round, add half the value of this ability to the move characteristic of friendly fighters while they make a move action that starts within 6 inches of this fighter. It's exactly the same as Swift as the Wind was after it got nerfed the first time. It's another nerf for this ability because the Pure Flood Seneschal is like kind of medium. He's not unplayable by any means. He's not terrible. It is much harder to fit in lists now, so it's a much worse ability than Swift as the Wind was. Swift as the Wind, you could just put it on a 110 point dwarf and just like have this super speed turbo dwarf that would just like run around the battlefield and have more survivability actually than the 210 point elf that currently has. And so you would just zoom this dwarf anywhere you wanted, and you were paying practically no points for it, so the rest of your list would have a ton of other cool stuff that you were accelerating. Now that's not true, but it is still an incredible ability if you can find the right things to accelerate across the board for it. 6 inches is a great sort of aura, especially because it affects self, and so you can sort of pop the ability and then wait, get everyone within 6 inches of you now, moving really fast, and then you can move, and this fighter has 5-inch move, right? So let's say you did it on 5s. You get now 8 inches of movement, so you can move actually past where your old bubble was and have a brand new bubble just in a totally different part of the field, and that will just like supercharge a different deployment group, and that can just be an incredibly powerful situation to find yourself in. A lot you can do here. I'm also calling teleports movement triples. Walk the Spirit Paths is the most exciting one. Remove this fighter from the battlefield and set them up anywhere on the battlefield floor more than 5 inches from enemy fighters. This just wins treasure missions on its own because it's like, think of it as like infinite movement, right? I mean, I said that 6 inches of movement was good. This can be like 18 inches across the board, and then you can just plop there, and then you can start running away somewhere else. So, for example, you take a treasure mission, right? If you win initiative in round 1, you get to, there's usually like one treasure that's really close to the opponent, and then one treasure that's close to you, and then like a few contested treasures, right? Well, you can pop walk the Spirit Paths, take the close to opponent treasure, and then send both of your moves just walking back towards you. So now your opponent has to kind of chase down your fighter while walking towards you, spending move actions when they would have wanted to spend attack actions, and just like be in a terrible situation. And that's incredibly powerful. There's also a teleport that I probably would have talked about in the double section if I hadn't recorded it before the last FAQ. That's called Through Darkened Skies. Remove this fighter from the battlefield, then set them up on a platform or the battlefield floor more than 5 inches from all enemy fighters. Essentially the exact same ability, but on a double. The difference here is that Walk the Spirit Paths can be done by a 65-point fighter, which is just really good. And if you're in pure Sylvaneth, it can be done by big fighters too. So you can do it on your Kurnoth Huntmaster, or you can do it on your 65-point chaff piece. So it's much more flexible in terms of who can do it, which I think makes it worth the triple. The double is only on prosecutors who are 180 points for a 15 wound fighter, which is really tough, or 205 points for a 20 wound fighter, but they only have toughness 4. They die so fast. This is where, the platform that you have it on is incredibly powerful. Being able to move a chaff model to just go score a point is crazy. Um, so I value Walk the Spirit Paths incredibly highly. Maybe I'll come to really respect Through Darkened Skies eventually, but right now I'm not quite there. Damage triples. This is, in my opinion, the biggest turnaround between like damage doubles all being terrible and damage triples sometimes being really good. Now, there are some really bad ones out there. For example, the new Sylvaneth team, Twistweld. The new Twistweld team has just a truly awful triple that half the time does 0 damage at all. It's the leader triple. I'm not even gonna like besmirch this video with that triple's stupid name. It's honestly just like a travesty. Even as a double, I'm not sure I'd really like it. And there's a lot of those unplayable, like completely unplayable damage triples. So really protect yourself. Do the math on your triples. Make sure that you can either like guarantee 6 damage, or you can feel pretty confident getting 8 most of the time, or just like averaging out to 8 at least. Like, sure, sometimes maybe you get 3 or 4, but like make sure that a lot of the time you're counting to 8. And luckily, there are some that do it. So the first one I want to talk about is Tearing Bite. Let's say you have it on 5s. If you're most of the platforms you can put it on, especially some of the cheaper platforms that are really easy to put in places, like the ones that ride cold ones, those models are so bad, but otherwise they're really good. The EV there is 10 if you have it against equal toughness, or 13 against lower toughness, which is wild. Berserk Rampage is also very good. This is the Vulcan Flameseekers one. Pick an enemy fighter within 1 inch and roll 6 dice. For each result, allocate equal to the value of the ability. For each other result, get 1. So each thing that matches your dice value, you get to deal that much damage, and then you get to deal 1. It's really crazy. It's a guaranteed 6 damage, which is amazing because each dice is worth 1 no matter what. But then if you have it on 4s, 5s, or 6s, even with 3s, it's kind of nice. You have the potential to like spike like crazy, but even then, it's still just a really solid like average damage. So, for example, like your average on 3s is still 8, right? And that's perfectly good. And then your average on 6s, I think, is 11, if I'm counting that right. And so it's just a really amazing sort of average and minimum. So when your minimum is 6 and your EV is higher than 8, that's just really powerful. It's also on a fighter who it only has 1 inch range, which is kind of tough and makes it a little bit unflexible sometimes. But the fighter who has it has toughness 5 and 20 wounds and only 140 points. So you actually don't mind if your opponent is spending a bunch of time like locked in combat with him, because he's just really annoying to fight. Generally when you fight against Vulcan Flameseekers, you actually want to be avoiding spending a bunch of attacks on that stupid dragon hat guy, because, it's just a lot of output to put into something where you only take out 1 body on objectives, and you only, score 140 points of like a Reaper condition or something like that. Like, it's just not a big return on the investment of attacks that you put into him. So having him run over, tie something up, and then do 11 damage to it or something is ridiculous. Fight for Profit. We have a few here that I think are they're worth talking about, but they're just not on the level of Tearing Bite and Berserk Rampage. The first one being Fight for Profit. This is one that can scale really well, but it's just so much better in other Grand Alliances. So it's just a +1 attack bubble. It does affect self, which is really nice, but it's only 3 inches. And it can help melee, ranged attacks, which is kind of nice. But let me give you some examples, right? So let's say you have an Endrin Master, who is probably the most exciting melee piece. You could maybe argue that an Arcanaut Admiral is more exciting, but let's say you have an Endrin Master and 2 Arcos nearby. The Engine Master boosts itself. That's like, let's say you move attack, boost yourself with Fight for Profit, and you get +1 dice there. And then you have these 2 Arcos that also get +1 dice, but they are only on like 1-3 damage, strength 3. So your EV is only 4, even though you just comboed it on 3 different fighters. That's really bad. That's just like bad, bad, bad. Like that is not worth a triple at all. And so you really have to be comboing hard to make Fight for Profit good. Like you need your Engine Master to get an attack in, and then you need like a Spear Argonaut to get an attack in, and then you need like an allied Annihilator Prime or something to get attacks in, all inside the FFP bubble. Like you need a lot of people getting attacks in for that FFP bubble to really climb up to this point where that damage is worth it compared to just like popping a couple doubles, right? So that's just kind of a thing to remember with Fight for Profit is for that to be good, for all of these kind of aura cry abilities to be any good, you have to combo with them so hard. And Chaos and Destruction have some tools to do that, but Order just doesn't have the tools to like really make it crazy. And so I wouldn't try to build around Fight for Profit. KO is a decent faction, and so sometimes you might just like do it because you rolled triple threes or triple, let's say you rolled triple ones, and then it was like, well, it's not really worth it to add a wild dice to make a rampage on ones, so here I am with my triple ones, I guess I'll do Fight for Profit. Like that's a reasonable place to use this ability, but for the most part, like you just can't build around it anymore. Devour Infection is another one where the EV on it is really weird because we're talking about attacks, but you do damage to your own fighter, which is not good. A lot of the fighters who you'd want to do this on, like Stormcast allies, like an Annihilator Prime or like this stupid Evocator Prime, like these big Stormcast allies, they have really high toughness and actually not that many wounds. So you don't actually want to be dealing damage to them. Like you really don't want to bring your Annihilator Prime accidentally from 25 to like 20 or 21, because that's the point where like those, like the 21st wound and then the 22nd wound are probably some of the most important, because in terms of how easy it is to count to 20 and 21 and how hard it is to count to 25, it's like it doesn't make sense, but when you look at like a lot of the top damage dealers in the game, that is really the space where it requires more activations for them. And so just like shredding your own Stormcast armor is no good, so you really want to have it on something with a really high wound pool. But then a lot of the things with high wound pools, like this Achillean King, it just like Achillean King has a bunch of attacks, and each attack doesn't do a lot. Or like Gore Guy out of Daughters of Cain, or I just barely can't reach my Evocator on Dracolines. Those have high wound pools, but each attack doesn't do that much damage. And so it's an odd place to be for the EV on Devour Infection. It's just one of those things where Order just doesn't do attacks as well as Chaos and Destruction do. And so Devour Infection is kind of a combo piece looking for a friend. The best thing you can do, I think, is maybe like the Kurnoth Huntmaster with Scythe, which is good because that does have a pretty good wound pool and it has that 3/6 attack profile. But you're kind of just locked into one reasonable option there. And even then, that's much worse than the 4/8s you could do. That said, if you get this on 6s, that's pretty wild. You have a really good chance of getting +3 attacks. That's something that Destruction can do on a better fighter for a double. But that's where we are at in Order. I mean, if you just start comparing abilities for any of the 3 Grand Alliances to Destruction abilities, it's just going to be embarrassing. Like Destruction abilities are so much better than every other GA, but Devour Infection is still like playable and it's worth talking about. It's just an odd place to be. Like it's just very dissatisfying to me when I try to combo with it because the options are just so awkward. Kill has kind of 6 to 9 damage. It's always guaranteed, but you have to very much set up for it. I think this is a very sort of playable ability. It's a very reasonable thing to try to do. It's just medium a lot of the time. So pick a visible enemy fighter, allocate a number of damage points to that fighter equal to 3 times the number of friendly fighters with both Wildercore and the dog rune mark within 3 inches of them. So you need to be really flooding the board with dogs and then using your wait actions to like end up getting a lot of dogs nearby. Once you have 4 dogs nearby, this is really amazing. So if you can get to a point where like you wait a few times, you force your opponent to commit, and then you like just drop a bunch of dogs sort of outside of their reach but still near them, you can make kill be like incredibly good, and then maybe win initiative. Like there's a lot of magical Christmas land things you can do with kill, right? So you could be against a really elite force and do a couple waits, and then they have to move their people up, and then you run forward with a bunch of dogs and you be like orbiting their person, and then you kill, and then you win initiative, and then you kill again, and then all of a sudden you've dealt 24 damage, and then they charge, and then they kill 2 of your dogs, and then things get tough from there. But but at least you've done 24 damage. You know it's tough, but it is doable. You can get a lot done with the doggy build from Wildercore Hunters. It's not sort of top competitive tier, but it is like good and sweet, and it's good for casual play. I think I undersold it when I was calling it all magical Christmas land. It is reasonable, but it's hard to make it like insane, is what I would say. Now we get to action triples, and there's 2 here that are pretty exciting. If a triple's worth 2 doubles, so just remember you want to get 2 out of it. You really can't easily beat the rate that they give you on doubles, and the action doubles are just so flexible. I would say in general, getting actions is the best thing you can do with a double, whereas triples, damage triples and movement triples are both just like right on the level of action triples, sometimes better. I do want to shout out the honorable mention Duty Unto Death. That is a one that you get to do a rampage on a triple, but you have to have taken 5 damage, and you have to be playing Fireslayer heroes, which die to even just being looked at. So like there's just never a point where you've taken damage where you're not dead, and you have to play Fireslayer heroes, which Fireslayers would be amazing if they had like 2 or 3 playable heroes, but all their heroes are just garbage. So it's just a really tough situation to be in if you want to play around that ability. But man, I could definitely imagine a different dwarven hero who could make that ability really good. Just Fireslayers doesn't have it. So let's talk about some actually good ones. Coordinated Strike. Pick a number of visible friendly fighters equal to half the value of this ability within 9 of this. 9 is such a huge bubble. Those fighters can each make a bonus move or bonus attack action. This is really powerful in the right circumstance, when the things that you are leveraging with it are like high value fighters. It can be a little bit awkward where Calthea Zandire is the cheapest platform for this ability. She costs 210 points. Allying her in to certain warbands like can just make the math kind of difficult. So that's kind of tough. I see a lot of lists with her kind of just propping up a random group of stuff. I don't want to like insult anyone's list building here, but let's just say like I think a lot of people reach for Calthea when they're like, man, I've got some fighters I like. And I mean, that's what my warband is. It's a collection of fighters I like, and what can we do with this? Like, okay, we can put Calthea in here, and we can get more of my fighters I like doing more stuff. And I think that's a very reasonable place to be, like in casual play, just like get more of the things you like from the fighters you like. In competitive play, it's tough because you really need what you're boosting with Calthea to already be pretty efficient. To get more out of that, you need her to really have high doubles. Like you need to be able to survive those games where you rolled double 1s, double 2s, and 2 singles, or you rolled double threes and four singles. And so now if you spend a wild dice to get coordinated strike, you're not doing anything else that round. And you're only coordinating striking two things, right? You still need that coordinated strike to be exciting. And so that's kind of difficult to set up. So Calthea can be kind of a double-edged sword in competitive play where she can kind of hurt you with the lack of flexibility. Any triple that really requires you to have it on a high dice value can be a little bit tough that way. Even some of the damage triples I talked about, Tearing Bite, you really want it on fives or sixes, but it's kind of nice on threes too. It's still pretty reasonable as long as you're hitting something with lower toughness than you, right? Berserk Rampage is always guaranteed 6, so even on threes, it's okay. Coordinated Strike can be fine on threes, but on a 1 or a 2, it's a disaster, and you can put yourself in an odd spot there. Creative Flame is insane though, so it is just 2 bonus move actions, but it can also be a bonus attack action, which is crazy. I know just getting 1 is like not good, but it just increases your flexibility so that your fail state isn't as bad, right? Like I said, the coordinated strike fail state, it is just 1 action, but it's like it requires you to sort of move around the value of your abilities, whereas Creative Flame is just as good no matter what your sort of numbers are on. So you still get these 2 bonus moves even if you have just triple ones, which is really nice. You can combo it with like just 1 big fighter super easily, because the fighter who has Creative Flame is only 125 points, which means that it's just like on rate, it's really good. It's really easy to list build with because of that 125 point platform. And it also, if you have the Beast Rune mark, you can make 2 bonus moves and a bonus attack action. Luckily, the dog that's in Vulcan Flame Seekers is absolute garbage. Otherwise, this would just be so annoying. There is a really good beast in order. It's Sephenir the Squid. So anyone who's into the idea of like a fire and water type of thing, or just anything like that, you can really kind of do some evocative stuff there. The Squid with Creative Flame is really insane because it's also pretty quick, and then you get your much better damage out of it, and that's just really nice. But I've just found Creative Flame to be amazing and just so easy to list build with. I still think Coordinated Strike is amazing. It's just that Calthea requires a lot from your list, and so you need to make sure that you're building with her in mind. She really likes to have some like big expensive fighters, and you want multiples, whereas Creative Flame can just like supercharge 1 expensive fighter. And so it's just a lot easier. Creative Flame also, it has this like board wide range where it has to be not within 6 inches of your fighter, but that means you can just have them in totally different neighborhoods, and you can have maybe just 2 fighters in your warband you're excited to use it on, but like you're very flexible about which one you do it with, whereas Coordinated Strike, you have to kind of create these like orbiting battlefield presences, which are still good. It was really good back when Annihilators were cheaper, and so you could do it in faction and you could do a lot of stuff there, but it still has like some use to it. But I think we're missing some of the pieces that would ally with it really well. I think I'm not super happy with maybe like mid-range fighters in order that would otherwise combo with it, I guess is why I'm upset. But it is quite good. So last but not least, we have control triples. Now, there's no real track record of people using control triples in order to like great effect. Part of that is that just in Warcry, control is like in a weird spot where like nets are the only thing you're allowed to use to control your opponent, which is annoying because nets I think are like the least fun way to do control, because it's either like you completely shut your opponent down or you get nothing, which is just it's like no matter what you roll on the net ability, it's unfun for someone, whereas control triples, other ones can be sort of a lot more interesting. So hopefully they kind of explore that space going forward. So Bloodrack Stare is pick a visible enemy fighter within a number of inches equal to the value of this ability and roll 2 dice. If either dice rolls a 3 up, until the end of the battle round, that fighter cannot make move actions or disengage. In addition, for each roll of 6, allocate damage points to that fighter equal to the value of this ability. So you can do some big damage sometimes, but 88% of the time you net them. You also have 2-inch reach on a fighter who has pretty good combat stats, so you can do kind of silliness like you can net them and then hit them, which is really funny, and they can't hit you back because they're outside of 1 but inside of 2 of you. So it's pretty good. I don't think it's amazing, but it's definitely worth talking about, and it is definitely something that, like, the Bloodrack Medusa has often just been a very serviceable ally in Order because she's quick, but she can still hit pretty hard, and she's not that killable. So she just like does this jack of all trades role that certain Order warbands just kind of need. And so that can be really useful. You can do things like you can net an opposing big thing and then hit their chaff nearby and not have to worry about the big thing coming and hitting you right now. And then next round, even if you lose initiative, it comes in, hits you once, and then you get to like disengage, net it, and then hit it again or something like that, right? You can do a lot there. So since that is playable, I want to talk about some sort of not quite there control triples in Order that I think just could use some help, right? Because I do think that like 2-me warriors is probably better at control than most of the control triples in Order, because you can use it to go like send steel helms to go tie up really scary things from your opponent. You can use it to just like bury your opponent on objectives because you're moving all of your fighters so quickly. You can use it to ruin your opponent on like wait actions so that they, like let's say the objectives are a place where they would be able to hit you, but you just wait with all your fighters, and so then they can't go hit anything because they're out of activations by the time you haven't even moved yet, and now it's time to get onto the objectives, and they're done, and then you later just go like boom and bring everyone to the objective, something like that. That I think is more effective at controlling your opponent and controlling their options than I think a lot of the stuff in Order. Like nobody plays Purifying Incense, which is the Knight Relictor ability that gives -1/-1 damage in a 3-inch bubble, because the Knight Relictor is 180 points, doesn't do a lot of damage, and so then it's like, who am I bringing that I need to keep alive, and how much of a disaster is it if I don't win initiative so I can't put the bubble up in time? Like, it's just very difficult. Every control triple that is sort of stopping your opponent from doing something is just a big investment, and it's relying on winning initiative, because if your opponent wins initiative, they'll just do whatever you were going to control them from. So, like it's really easy to get excited about an ability like the one in Order of Azir that like takes away an opposing ability, or the one in the new Ruination Chamber that turns an ability to ones. But then you think about it and it's like, well, how many warbands really rely on an ability that like they're really sad if it turns into a 1? Probably less than half. And then even if you are against an opponent who has abilities like that they really, really need, like if your opponent is running Calthea and you want to turn their ability to ones, but you lose initiative, and then it's like you spent all these points on this fighter who now does nothing because they just used the ability you were going to really cripple, right? The proliferation of like all of your damage coming out of just one huge chompy piece, like Destruction doesn't care at all about control triples, because if they win initiative on you, their giant honking guy who has +1 attack and has like bounding leaps or something, or charge, it just like destroys whatever it's going to destroy, and then you get to put your control down, right? So that's just a really tough place to be when you're using triples instead of doubles to control your opponent. because it's such a big investment even creating a triple. And then if you don't get to use it, like if I were going to have a warband that had a controlled triple in it, like a disruptive triple, I would really want to have another offensive triple somewhere else on the field as well. Because if I lose initiative, I need to know that I'll still gain value from having spent that wild dice, um, even if my opponent gets to do their thing. So with all that said, um, there's some interesting control triples in Order of Azir that I think are worth talking about. The first is Tangle Them Up. Pick a visible enemy fighter within 3 inches of this fighter until the end of the battle round. Subtract 2 from the attack's characteristic of melee attack actions made by that fighter. If Onslaught is worth 1 attack and triples need to be worth doubles, this does it. -2 attacks. Really good if their big thing is sort of tied up with a fighter that you would like to have go to toe with it. Their sort of giant sort of 4-8 damage profile fighter is now down to like 1 attack, and now they have to onslaught just to get up to 2 attacks, and it's just a really awkward situation for them. It's incredibly powerful. It can turn a really scary destruction or chaos fighter into just like a cute little puppy. The issue, again, is if you don't win initiative, it does nothing, because there's really only ever going to be 1 fighter on the board that you care about with this. And the other issue is that Lissa is kind of not the best profile in the world. I think you could play her and it would be fine, but I don't think people are particularly excited to play that profile. Valius does have a pretty exciting profile, but he's not an ally, so you can't bring him into other warbands, and he is very expensive. He's 220 points. However, They Will Break Upon My Shield is very interesting. Until the end of the battle round, subtract the value of this ability from the damage points allocated to this fighter by each hit and crit from attack actions that target this fighter to a minimum of 1. So it does nothing really if he's swamped by chaff, because, they're still getting, 1-1 is pretty embarrassing, but they still get to do something to him. But it's really good if he wants to just like hold up a Gutlord or hold up a Fomeroid Crusher, or just like run up to something and just make it stay there forever. That is the kind of thing where if you could ally him, there would be other warbands that would be really interested in that ability. So something like Lumineth Realm Lords would be incredibly interested in that ability, because having just like a big holding piece to lock down and just like stay in combat with an enemy elite would be super valuable to them, because they're quite fragile, but they do have ways to deal damage and score points if they can just stay alive. Like Stone Guard have really good consistent damage output, but are just very one-shottable and can, they're just like in a really tough place with where the meta is, with how many like 4-8 damage profiles, 5-10 damage profiles are around. And so those Stone Guard don't want to have to survive hits from really big scary things. And so if Valius could just be there to run up and just tie up the biggest scariest thing, you'd be really excited about that in Lumineth Realm Lords. But you can't, because Valius is not a hero, and so it's just like very awkward in Order of Azir, even though it's a very good ability. The last one is Hammertide. I'm interested if the big points drops on Sirene's Razors make Hammertide good. Pick a corner of the battlefield and draw a straight line 1 millimeter wide between the center of this fighter's base and that corner. Enemy fighters whose base touch that line cannot jump, fly, or climb. In addition, roll a number of dice equal to the value of this ability for each such enemy fighter. Allocate 1 damage for each 3-up. If you can get 3 fighters in this line, this ability is really crazy good. When I did watch Sirene play recently, I think you're kidding yourself if you think you're going to get 3 fighters in there very often. But if you do, the damage output actually does become comparable to other good damage triples. Most of the time, I think you're going to be getting 1 or 2. And we really need to talk about the FAQ situation here. So is that 1 millimeter line a laser point, or is it a infinitely tall line? Like, if you're pointing the laser, are you pointing the laser from her base to the corner, or are you pointing it down and drawing a line from her base to the corner? The reason this matters is the whole point here is to either strand an enemy fighter on terrain so it can never leave that terrain, or to strand an enemy fighter on the battlefield floor so it can never leave the battlefield floor. So you get to be the master of terrain with this. The problem is if Sireni is on terrain and the enemy fighter is on terrain, Sireni still doesn't hit them because the line to the corner goes down. If Sireni is off terrain and they're on terrain, Sereni's line doesn't hit them. So the only way it hits them is if she's on the floor and they're on the floor. If the line is a laser pointer line. If it's an overhead line, then this ability is very good. We need an FAQ for this. I don't know exactly how I would rule this personally in a tournament. That's a tough question, really, because I don't think there's any real hints here between, you know, like in the grammar here. Like they do say draw a straight line between the center, which maybe you could say that implies, like if you wanted it to be a laser beam, you would say point a straight line, and instead like drawing is a top down thing. That's the closest I could possibly get to saying that it should be infinitely tall. It's really fuzzy. So I guess maybe I would rule that the line is infinitely tall, but maybe not. I don't know. I think it's really debatable which one you should rule here. So that's tough because if it's a straight laser pointer line, this ability is trash. But otherwise, it might be really good. And Sireni being, taken 40 points down to being 165 points is an incredible fighter. Even without this ability, she's still a pretty decent fighter. And so, this might become finally a controlled triple in order that is actually interesting and good. So I wanted to do just like a recap and do all the abilities that I actually care about. Instead of doing a top 5, I decided that the top 5 thing was kind of silly, so I just wanted to do all the ones I think matter. And Creed of Flame, I think, is the best one. The non-dice costs are pretty medium. Like, you have to include an ally that combos with the ability. The fighter that has it is not a leader, so you can't ally it into other things. So those are some real costs, but there are really incredible combos that you can do with this. It's really easy to just include one big good fighter, and there's just a lot of good big fighters out there. The Annihilator Prime, the Achillean King, Sephinir, there's just a ton of different stuff that's really good with Creed of Flame, and it's just such an easy combo to put together. You can have 2 fighters that you're happy to use with it. You can just have one. Although your Rune Dad is kind of also always like a pretty reasonable target for this as well. So you can just get a ton of actions for incredibly high value fighters, which is just really good. I've played Creed of Flame quite a bit, and I've found that it is just, the rate on it is incredible in terms of even just using it as a movement ability to move an Annihilator Prime 6 inches. Just the delivery mechanism for something big here is just, it's wild what you can do. Speaking of which, To Me Warriors also as a delivery mechanism is just huge. There really aren't a ton of list building costs to this. I guess maybe you could say like the bigger fighters you have, the fewer fighters you hit with the ability, essentially. So that's just kind of a regular cost to list building in Warcry anyway. It's just really amazing. I guess it does sort of ask you to have a pretty pure list since your allies don't get to use it, but otherwise it's not a big deal. It's really amazing how many fighters you can accelerate with this and how much like value you can get in terms of weights and movement and sort of rushing across the board. All of that is really crazy. Third, I'll have Walk the Spirit Paths. They have incredibly low costs in that tree revs. It should say tree revs instead of arch revs, but they're really easy includes at 65 points. You probably want them anyway. You can do some really dirty things with a Kurnoth Huntmaster with Scythe, where This counts as an ability, so you can't rush after you do it. But the Kurnoth Huntmaster with Scythe, if you're building in a pure Sylvaneth list, it can drop down and then walk over and get a hit in. Then I like Tearing Bite. The list building cost is so low because any Saurus is eligible. It is one note, it's much better outside of Seraphon than it is in Seraphon because every single Saurus pays to have access to this ability. So Saurus aren't that efficient point for point on their own. And each additional platform, because you're probably only using this once per turn, because you really want to have 3, 4, 5, 6 on it. So you probably aren't going to have 2 good triples. And so you're only using it once. So every Saurus that's in your list that isn't using it in a given turn is paying points to not use the ability. So each Saurus becomes progressively less efficient depending on how many Saurus you have in your list. So it's actually kind of bad in Seraphon, if I'm being honest. I think Tearing Bite actually might be the biggest thing holding Seraphon back as a faction. But it means that Seraphon make incredible allies, and all of the Saurus in Seraphon make really, really good allies because Tearing Bite is just so good and puts out so much damage. Coordinated Strike is here. I know I pooped on Calthea a whole bunch, but I do think she's really good. I do think in the right list, Coordinated Strike is really good. I kind of like her with +1 strength for 230 points. It is a real list building cost. She costs a lot. You want to find ways to run this ability with kind of higher leverage fighters, but if you can, this can be really powerful. Berserk Rampage comes after that one. The Dragon Hat Dwarf only being 140 points. He's not allyable, so there are issues there, but just that guaranteed 6, EV 8 to 11, depending on what your dice are. That's really nice. Maybe something that should bump it down a little bit is that it competes with Creative Flame, which is just better, in my opinion. But it's still just very good on its own. And just because an opponent doesn't have Whippy Dwarf does not mean that I'm going to have an easy time when I play them. Then we have Release the River that is quite good. The non-dice costs here are very high because the Pure Flood Seneschal is very expensive, kind of low impact compared to its, if you got that impact out of a 160 point fighter, you'd be super jazzed about it. But man, you just get so much movement out of it. I think right now it's a little bit weaker in order than it normally is because you used to have lots of really scary dwarves that you were excited to move around with this. Old Dispossessed really loved, you could put hammerers on and flood the board with hammerers, and they did a ton of damage, and they loved having the Swift as the Wind to boost them up the board. Now Dispo can't really play that way. Dispossessed is still one of the best in the game, but they don't really play that way, and they aren't interested in an ally like the Pure Flood Seneschal. Fire Slayers are very interested in the Pure Flood Seneschal, but nothing is incredible in Fire Slayers because Fire Slayers are so bad. It is the best thing they can do, but it is not necessarily good in that situation. So I think I haven't seen anyone really crack the code on the list that makes Release the River the best it can be. But the power is there, and someone will crack that code eventually. Last one is Hammertide. Like I said just recently, if the FAQ gives you what you want on Hammertide, then it's amazing. If it doesn't, then it's unplayable. So ask your TOs before you bring Sireni. The funny thing about Sireni, though, and the reason it makes this list, Hammertide makes this list, is that Sireni would still be playable. If I really wanted to play a Sireni list, I would still play it even if the TO said that Hammertide was terrible, because Sireni's just good. So who cares if the ability's bad? And the reason I think it beats Kill, Sharp-Eyed Scryhawk, Fight for Profit, the reason I think it beats all of those is because Sireni is just so good on her own that this triple just feels like found money. It's oh, they killed my Rampager because, they did something. Well, now I've got this triple. Now I actually don't mind just using the wild dice to make a double, and I'll just keep this triple, and now I'll just lock down one of their fighters, and this is perfectly fine. like there's just a lot of situations where you could just be playing Cyrene because you want to because she's good, and then you just kind of go, oops, I guess I'll hammer tide, and that can be really solid. So there you have it for the triples in order. I went way too long, as I am wont to do, but there's a lot of them, and order is a really big Grand Alliance. So I hope you get to play with some of these, and when you do, may all your rolls free Palestine.